Where does free energy come from? It comes from the same place that energy comes from. It comes from the now. By doing a little trick with power factor, it's possible to generate energy for almost free, practically no cost. Here's what happens. Conservation of energy has to deal with, or excuse me, let me back up. The laws of thermodynamics. The laws of thermodynamics are both our friend and our enemy, because the kind of energy that we want to do anything useful is dissipative by its nature. It's loss-oriented, and that's what thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics, concerns themselves with. Loss by way of conversion. So when we want to heat our home with an electric heater, we have to have that heater lose some of its electromagnetic energy by converting it into heat. And then hopefully we put lots of insulation on our walls so we don't lose the heat too much, but we will lose some. Likewise, when we want to drive an electric car, we convert some of the electromagnetic energy into mechanical motion, and so we're losing some energy in the process of getting some benefit. Now, free energy has, or energy in general I should say, has two components, and we only focus on one, the loss. For instance, we look at DC the wrong way. We think of DC as a one-way flow of electricity, but that's false. Sooner or later we either have to replace the battery or recharge it with reverse current. So in actuality, a rechargeable battery operates under AC, not DC. See? So we really don't look at things correctly, holistically. All right. Well, likewise, when we deal with alternating current, or I should say alternating current in the context of the laws of thermodynamics, that's only one side of the picture, because it has to do with positive power factors that we can use. But what about negative power factors? Some will say they don't exist, but that's a bunch of hooey. They do exist. Op-amps, operational amplifiers, create that kind of electricity, which it has sine waves, and it is a negative unity power factor. The amperage and the voltage waves each have their own waves. See, with DC we never think about waves. We just think, oh, it's all flatline. But with AC we have waves, and it gets a little complicated because the current wave and the voltage wave have to match in time. They have to be in phase. And that's when we get our maximum loss, our maximum conversion, our maximum benefit. Well, that's still only one half of the equation. Well, I should say 1/4, because one half has to do with a zero power factor. And that's when either the current leads the voltage by 90 degrees, by 1/4 cycle actually, by 1/4 cycle of an AC cycle, or it lags by a 1/4 cycle. And so we have 2/4 of a cycle, conceptually speaking, of phase relation between current wave, a wave of current, and a wave of voltage, in which we have no energy that is useful. The energy is there, conservation of energy. The energy is there, we just can't use it because the waves are 90 degrees out of phase, one way or the other, lagging or leading, the voltage or the current. But there's still 1/4 more that we've overlooked, and that's negative unity. Idealistically speaking, we never have positive unity anyway. We have something just short of it, but usually we try to get it as close as possible because that maximizes our efficiency. But that's, again, loss-oriented by way of conversion. But when we deal with negative unity as a concept, not in actual practice, but in concept, that's 1/4 of the conceptual circle of alternating current, in which the wave of current and the wave of voltage are diametrically opposed to each other. They're half a cycle in separation of time. So it's as if the current advanced let's say, by a quarter cycle, and the voltage retarded by a quarter cycle, so that the net result is a half cycle out of phase. Now the beautiful thing about it is it does not comply with the laws of thermodynamics. No loss of energy happens because no conversion happens, because it stays in the system. It doesn't leave. It moves around inside, but it doesn't move. Aha! It does not move. What does it do? Well, it will move in a sense, but because it's 180 degrees out of phase, it cancels itself and creates the appearance that no movement is happening, when in reality it is moving. It's just canceling itself completely. So it's both moving in one direction and moving in the opposite direction at the same time. In other words, when you take a current wave and put it out of phase with the voltage wave by a whole half cycle, it's as if it's the same. You couldn't tell the difference whether or not they are moving in opposite directions or whether or not they're simply out of phase by half a cycle. The result is the same. 180 degrees out of phase, negative unity power factor, and a standing wave. Now that standing wave is a mathematical fiction resulting from the summation of the two waveforms at any particular moment in time. So you get this standing wave that flip-flops, like undulates, but it doesn't move. It doesn't move one way or the other, it just undulates.
The side of the graph would be the other side of the Earth. So the top is the wave going forward, and the red on the bottom is the wave going backwards. The hands are the time frames that these operate in. And then the standing wave in the middle, you can see, does not propagate. That's why it's called the standing wave. It's stationary. It's an alternating current with a fixed distribution in space, and the clock hands on the side show you that it's a composite of the forward traveling wave and the reflected traveling wave. So in a certain sense, the standing wave is fictitious because it's a resultant. But it's important to achieve this standing wave to get the maximum effect at both ends, as you can see is what happens here. And there's a nodal point in the middle where there's no electrical activity, and that would be either in the center of the Earth or somewhere along the surface there. The actual spherical coordinates for calculating this are hideous, so it's easier just to express it representatively like I'm doing here.
It's like a seesaw. You don't go anywhere with a seesaw. Now on a merry-go-round, at least you're going somewhere. You're going around in circles. And if you apply that circle to a perpendicular of the road, now you can have wheels on a car and actually go somewhere. But with a standing wave, it's more like a seesaw. Or a swing. You're on a swing swinging. You don't go around and around. At least I don't, and most people don't. You go forwards, almost all the way to the top, but not quite. In my case, I go slightly more than a quarter of the way up, and then I come down and go up a little more than a quarter the opposite way, and I reciprocate back and forth. And that's the same way with a seesaw, only you don't go as high with a seesaw as you would with a swing. But it's a portion of your swing, and then you go backwards and forwards, reciprocate. You go backwards and forwards. You turn around and go the opposite direction. So you're not returning. Well, that's what a standing wave does when you've canceled the current and voltage portions of an AC sine wave of electricity. Well, that means it stays in one place. It doesn't move. For all intents and purposes, it doesn't move. Whether or not it's actually moving, which it is, it just cancels itself. It's a mathematical fiction resulting from the summation of two waves that are out of phase by 180 degrees. It looks like they're not moving, and so our brain will say it's not moving, but in reality they are. It's just, effectively speaking, there's no motion. Now, that means there's no dissipation, and the laws of thermodynamics does not apply. Why? Because there is a clause, a loophole, within the conservation of energy which says that time shifts, doesn't say what kind, it just says that time shifts can create a condition in which conservation does no longer uphold. Energy is no longer upheld by conservation. It can no longer be conserved if time shifts. They never say how or in what manner. And I had to learn on my own what it means in terms of something that is doable. I don't know anything else. I just know what will work. based on analyzing how my circuit works. In other words, I fumbled my way and stumbled my way into it by studying the Joseph Newman motor, but then I simulated his motor, and I figured out how it works secretly. He didn't share how it worked. I had to find out from somebody else how you build it to make it work as an over-unity device, because Newman kept it a secret from the public. See, he had 2 stages in the development of his device. Pre-over-unity, in which it was not over-unity, and then post, in which it was over-unity, but that version he never told anyone. The prior version, which was not over-unity, that's the one he published and let everybody know. And it has to do with the bar magnet in the middle. That's not over-unity, but if you replace the bar magnet with a canister of helium and wrap an open coil around it, now all of a sudden it becomes over-unity. Everything else is the same between the 2 models. Well, I took my simulation before I knew about this secret, and the simulation told me it had to be different than what he was saying. I just couldn't compute. I was confused. Because the evidence of what he was giving us is not the same as what my simulation was telling me. In order to be over-unity, like he said it was, it cannot be built the way he describes it to be built. It has to be built according to my simulation of it. I had to stumble my way into that awareness, into that success. But that was theoretical. I didn't know how to build it. Well, now I know. But I took his simulation and developed it further. I reorganized it, simplified it, and then I saw I could throw away things. I could throw away the battery pack. I could throw away the commutator, and just strictly keep the secret, that is similar to his helium canister with the open coil wrapped around it, but different, more effective or convenient, more convenient, because you don't have to do things the hard way. But, he didn't know any differently, and it was set up for his system. See, my system, I can do it any way I want. I'm designing it. So he didn't really design. He just kind of stumbled his way through. But I stumbled my way through the simulator so I can change and improve the design before I go ahead and build it and tell anybody else to build it. But now I got to understand it to explain it to people. And so this is the point of the video, or else nobody would believe me. Well, it's just a simulator. Don't trust it. Yeah, $2,000 simulator. I don't think it makes mistakes. Or else I would want my money back if I had paid the full $2,000 to fully register it. Be that as it may. So by shifting time, conservation of energy does not apply, but that's not even true. Because the energy didn't go away, it's still there, it's just out of phase by 180 degrees. We can't use it, but it's there, yet we haven't lost it. Unlike a zero power factor, we have not lost it, we've preserved it. It's in a state of hibernation. And as such, it's passive. It's actually 100% potential energy. That's what we've done. So the laws of thermodynamics only applies to kinetic energy. That's the energy we lose. That's the energy we convert. That's the energy we get any benefit from. But when we have a negative unity power factor, it's all potential energy, no kinetic energy, so there's no way we could lose it. No way we could get any benefit from it. No way we could convert it. Yet it's there, and it's hibernating, and it's passive, it's potential energy. So we use that potential energy as a cookie mold or a role model. A role model is better. As a role model, using simple principles in electrodynamic engineering and electrical engineering, we use it as a role model to serve as, to instigate another isolated section of the circuit to actually have to serve as a voltage source that never dissipates. It has an endless supply of amp hours. Well, it itself does not have an endless supply of amp hours because I keep that separate on the other side of the circuit. This side of the circuit is simply well-preserved voltage because it's never drained. It's always got a voltage. Now I have to stimulate it to maintain it, but it takes like microvolts and pico amps or less, teeny little amount of watts, but high frequency. That's the one thing I've retained from my simulation of Joseph Newman design, or his secret, I should say, that worked. So I stimulate the voltage condition to maintain itself, but because it's non-dissipative, negative unity power factor, That's all it's good for. It's good for acting as a potential voltage source, not a kinetic voltage source, because a kinetic voltage source, it's going to be drained of its voltage like it always does. Standard, batteries in a car, how many amp hours? Well, they're being drained because they're being drained of their kinetic energy. But I divide my circuit up into partitions, and I have one area that's full of potential energy in the form of voltage and current, both voltage and current, in two separate subdivisions. Kind of like a center tap transformer has two coils on one side and one coil on the other side. Well, without explicitly saying the arrangement of what I do, I divide the current from the voltage on one side of a situation that can be made analogous and is functionally the same as a center tap transformer, operating as an isolation transformer, because the two coils on the center tap side are different in size, or value I should say, of induction. And that means I actually have a transformation going on between those two coils, because they're slightly isolated from each other too. So I have a three-way, it's a triangle of transformers arrangement. And so I have a step-up transformer, so I get separation of current on one coil on one side of the center tap transformer, and then the other coil on that side of the center tap transformer is high in voltage, because they're two different size coils. One is very small, the other is very large. And then on the other side, that is a single coil, I have the blend of those two, high current and high voltage. So I've managed to produce all this energy, but it's still all negative unity power factor. Can't use it. Now I've discovered there's several different ways of converting that into a positive unity power factor, and at least one of those solutions that I'm thinking of is mechanical. It's not electrical. So I have different options that I can choose from to make it usable, to make it in a form that can be dissipated to move a car. 50,000 watts. I'm feeding the darn thing a half a nanowatt, and yet it produces 50,000 watts, over 50,000 watts. I'm rounding down. And that's like, okay, it's not perpetual motion because I do have to feed it. If I turn off that high frequency input, the whole thing will die immediately. So it doesn't store any energy within itself. It does replace the need to have any batteries, because I could use solar panels, nanowatts. How much solar panels does it take, So I could run off on a cloudy day. In a darkened area, I could still have enough requirement of square footage, or square centimeters I should say, of a solar panel arrangement to be able to input adequate power to run this thing, and yet it's still putting out 50,000 watts. So I could drive a car in the middle of the night and still have energy, because the passing headlights of the car is going the other way will momentarily, and then you could have a little battery to store that energy, because it is momentary, but or you could store the energy from the daytime. So it runs on so little power, you could shrink the battery pack to one module. You wouldn't need more than one. Normally a battery pack in a car, you might have 12. My car has 24. That's why they're dead, because it has such a high usage of electricity. It's a heavy car, RAV4 EV from 2002. But the fact is, you'd only need one 12-volt battery. You wouldn't need 12 or 24 of them to store the energy that you're trickling from a tiny solar panel. So as it is, you would never drain the battery a whole lot, because you're using half a nanowatt. So how can you drain it? You could go from here and drive around the world a few times if we had endless nights, on the charge of one battery, running the darn thing. I'm just, speaking off the top of my head, but that's how it works. We make use of a negative unity power factor to accumulate energy, and quite frankly, amazingly, it accumulates pretty fast. And once it reaches a certain level that is useful, in RMS values, let's say, well, what my car needs, it needs 345 volts RMS, and it needs, for cruising, it needs around 50 amps, or for full throttle acceleration going up a hill, it needs just slightly over 200 amps. This is all RMS. So once the accumulation has reached those levels, or a little bit more than that, now you can start to use it as a voltage source, but it'll never be dissipated. So I literally have to throw away the energy. I'm kind of like the Edwin Gray motor. I have to throw away the energy to make sure, I have to do it in a pulsed manner to make sure it does not exceed, well, because it has nowhere to go. It's because it cannot go anywhere. It cannot be dissipated. So I have to momentarily dissipate it. I have to turn off the negative unity power factor for just an instant, and that's all it takes. And then all that energy gets radiated. I literally turn it into a broadcast station, and I radiate that, a little radio broadcast station, and it puts out energy. Not to worry, it's not going to screw up your AM radio if you still have one, because there are ways to. These are all technical sidebars that can all be dealt with, so it's no big issue. I've already dealt with it, so I already know. But the energy does have to be dissipated in a periodic manner to prevent it from frying itself, because it would fry itself if it kept growing like that. But that's all it'll do. It'll accumulate, and via that accumulation, it'll keep surging. It'll keep growing. So I periodically have to dissipate and throw away most of that energy, so it goes back to like nanovolts instead of kilovolts, and it radiates it out in a big burst, but only for an instant, and then it goes back to surging again. So it's these pulsations of surging that take place, and that's all negative unity power factor. And then I convert it. I convert it into something that's positive unity power factor so that I can dissipate, but I keep it separate. I keep it isolated. So I have all kinds of transformers situations. They don't look like your normal transformer. In fact, I can't simulate this in LT-Spice because LT-Spice is so conservative and so narrow-minded. If you don't have only two coils, one on either side of your transformer model in your LT-Spice simulation, it gives you a warning. It says, sorry, you can't simulate this. So I prefer to do my simulation in microcap from SpectrumSoft because I can have multiple coils on all kinds of interesting configurations of transformers and get the kind of results I want. So I have all kinds of isolation transformer membrane, so to speak, separating the different sections of the circuit to perform different functions. And it's taken me time to figure out all the different functions I have to perform. Because, you know, what do I know? I'm not formally trained in this business at all. I just bumble my way through, self-taught. So, you know, trial and error. Edison, you know, trial and error. I have lots of time, and so I put in a lot of time, and I bumble and stumble, and what works I build on, and if it doesn't work, I move on to something else. Anyway, that's how the system works in a nutshell. And if you can understand the simple technology or terminology that I just used, then it qualifies you as a technician at the very least. You don't have to be an engineer in electricity. You can be a technician, because power factor is what electrical technicians deal with all the time on the AC transmission line. But do we go in that area of negative unity power factor? Some people on the internet says it doesn't even exist. So some people don't even go there. They don't even think about it, let alone deal with it on a constant basis. But op-amps are known to put out a negative unity power factor. In fact, there's a Wikipedia article. It's called, oh, if I can remember the name, impedance converter. There's a third term, but at least those two, impedance converter. It's a funny phrase. I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I couldn't explain it because I don't even understand the phrase, but I believe those are the terms. Impedance converter. Negative impedance converter. Those are the three terms. Negative impedance converter. And they give the example of op-amps, but unfortunately, it takes more energy to run an op-amp than it does for the energy that comes out of it, so you don't get any over-unity gain. It's certainly not something for a power supply. It's just an interesting anomaly, you know. Oh, look at that. I can make the current and the voltage out of phase by 180 degrees. Woohoo! but I can't do anything useful with that, so I don't get to learn that it could be useful, that it could be a non-dissipative voltage source that has an endless supply of voltage, which in an isolation transformer situation on the other side becomes an endless supply of amp hours. So this is where I get the title for my book. Extend the range of electric vehicles by maximizing their amp hours. Because everybody thinks in terms of batteries, how many amp hours are in the battery, and that determines how much you can charge your battery pack and determine how far you can go before you have to recharge your battery pack all over again. Now there are some EVs that are lightweight, single occupant, that are totally covered in solar panels, and you can go as long as you like. They're like a bicycle, basically. they're a solar-powered bicycle is what they are. So they're not a true car in any sense. You can't take luggage, or extra passengers. And they may not even have a radio in there. I haven't seen any with an antenna. I suppose they do. But, they're not something you'd want to really... It's not a consumer product. It's just something to have some fun with, a toy. Or go on some excursion, some adventure, or you're on a contest, a race, can you do it? How far can you go? But it's not a consumer product. Well, this ideology that I'm giving you, or describing to you, I'm not giving you, it's in my book. You got to go on Amazon and look up my name, Vinyasi. This is the conceptualization, the overview of how free energy works. So where are you getting the energy from? You're getting it from the now, so to speak. Again, it's a mathematical summation of two diametrically opposed directions of current and voltage for all intents and purposes. One is moving backwards, the other is moving forwards by only a quarter cycle to give a half cycle difference between them. So in a 60-second or 60 cycles per second duration of time, in other words, in 1/60th of a second, your current has to travel backwards in time by a quarter of that, so that would be 1/240th of a second, which is basically 4 parts per thousand of a second. So if you have your current move backwards in time by 4 parts per thousand of a second, and if you have your voltage move forward in time by 4 parts per thousand of a second, now you have a difference of 8 parts per thousand to give you all the energy in the world you could possibly want. The only other two criteria that I haven't mentioned yet, well, there's 3 actually. You have to keep your voltage input very low, similar to a crystal radio. So the amount of power is running this thing is no different than what used to run, or can still run, crystal radios, if you're familiar with what I mean. Little crystal radios run on about 1 microvolt, more or less, and that's about how much my device runs on. The other thing you have to do is feed it high frequency, even though it's 1 microvolt. And the third thing is, if you want more power, you increase the size of your main motor coil. So now this is where Newman kicks in. Bigger is better, so you increase the size of your main motor coil, and that means more mass of copper. And that'll give you more power. Now if you want to liberate that power, because all you've done is create it, now you have to increase the size of your rotor coil, your squirrel cage rotor on the inside of your single-phase induction motor, because this is what I operate. I don't operate, somebody says, oh, make us a free energy device for a 3-phase motor, because we like those motors. Well, I'm sorry, I can only do it for a single-phase induction motor, not 3-phase, because 3-phase is outside my ability to comprehend how I would deal with that, let alone over unity. So a single-phase induction motor has already a main motor coil and little starter coils. So it's already conceptually, that's how I started. I started from that along with the Newman device. I kind of blended the two. But I'm not sure you could take an off-the-shelf induction motor and deal with it. I think you'd have to build the motor from scratch. I'm not sure, but it's possible maybe you could deal with an off-the-shelf. I don't know. In any case, where was I? Oh, so the way you liberate all the power that you've increased, you've increased the size of your main motor coil to give you more power. Now you have to liberate it. So you have to increase the size of your squirrel cage rotor in order to give you more induction there, more magnetism. And that'll liberate it, and then you get to see the benefit. instead of just having it resident potentially, because it is all a question of building up free potential energy and then liberating it by way of conversion into kinetic energy. So it's a multi-step process with all these different factors. There's not a lot of them. It's not rocket science, but it's still not a flashlight circuit. It's somewhere a little more complicated than a flashlight circuit and a little less than putting a man on the moon. It's somewhere in between the two extremes. Hey, I'm using a trial version of microcap which limits me to 75 components and 10 nodes. Nodes are divisions of voltage. If you have a topographic map, if you know anything about topographic maps, they are gradients of elevation. Well, if you consider translating that into, or converting that into a voltage gradient map, that's what nodes represent, the boundary condition between two different areas in your circuit that have a different voltage than each other. And it's usually because of the type of components you have arranged and how they're arranged and what kind of components. That will determine whether or not you have a node in the first place between them, and will then determine how many you have and where are they in the circuit. So you have all these boundaries. They're like states of the Union. California and Texas each have their own voltage level because there are boundaries between them. California has 2 volts and Texas has 3, and Arizona in between has 17 for some uncanny reason, and Utah has negative 90. Whatever. They each have their own voltage. Well, the boundary condition between them, the state boundary, is the node. And in the circuit, a trial version of microcap, I'm allowed 10 boundaries of voltage differences and 75 components. So I have to keep my simulation simple. I have to keep my concept simple, which helps me to understand it better. So this is not rocket science, but it's in an area where we don't pursue, we don't go there. And I believe transients, I won't get into the technicalities, but transients on a transmission line, for instance, occur because of this explanation that I've just given, the negative unity power factor, and the partial isolation. Because of all these different isolations that I talk about, you get that on a transmission line, in all likelihood you increase your risk of getting a transient. So I think I've covered all the basics of where does free energy come from. It comes from the same place that energy comes from, so there's really no difference between the two. We call it free because we think it's freely impossible. It's the dreamer who's free to dream, right? But he doesn't have to worry about living in the real world. So that's our definition of free energy, the dreamer, the man of La Mancha, you know? Or, well, I don't know if I want to make an analogy to Martin Luther King, but okay, we'll leave it to man of La Mancha. But no, in my case, yeah, I do have a dream. I did. That's the whole reason why I got started, because I had absolutely no idea how to go about it. Well, I had some guesses, and they proved to be correct. Eric Dollard's LMD analog computer in LMD mode, in longitudinal magnetodielectric mode, was the best thing for me to get started in simulating that. But ultimately, I had to move on to other techniques. Because as good as that is, and it's a very effective method, if you go back and read L.V. Larry, I forget what his name is. It's first initial L as in Larry, and middle initial V as in Victor, but I don't know what his name is. And then his last name is Bewley, B-E-W-L-E-Y. So if you go back and read what turned on Eric Dollard in the first place in his high school years about analyzing networks, transmission networks, you find out that there are variations different than what Eric Dollard has given us about his analog computer that are actually more efficient in creating free energy. So efficient it's dangerous. So I learned pretty quickly that I can't go there. Once I got it so well developed, I had to stay away and find some other way. I had already stumbled on other ways, but they weren't practical to produce anything useful. But studying Joseph Newman proved to be the best thing I could have done, because his device worked. He just didn't, like Stanley Meyer, he kept one secret to himself. You know, Stanley Meyer did the same thing. He kept a secret to himself too. And nobody understands Stanley Meyer because they don't know his secret. Aaron Murakami and a few other people knows his secret, and because of Aaron Murakami, I know Stanley Meyer's secret. But it was because of Byron Brubaker Byron Brubaker, who calls himself MX6 Maximus on YouTube and Facebook, it's because of him that I know of Newman's secret, but it was because of the simulator, the LT-SPICE simulator, because I was able to do Newman's device in LT-SPICE because it's a simple device. What I came up with is a little complicated, so I can't do it in LT-SPICE. But Newman's device is very simple, so I did it in LT-SPICE, and that's before Byron told me anything, and so I already knew it was different than what Joseph Newman told everybody, and that's what confused me. And you know, when you get confused, you can't think straight. You can't make an opinion or analyze. You just your brain goes into a mind-warping dullness, and you can't even say to yourself, "I don't understand," because you're so confused you can't even say, "I don't understand." That's how confused. I just go into this zombie numbness, and I don't even recognize with any degree of self-awareness that I've turned into a zombie of confusion. So I just I couldn't deal with it. Overload. Anywho, I've given you enough information to explain and defend my circuit. If you're an electrical technician, you know enough to know everything I've talked about to at least understand my words, whether or not you agree with me. To everybody else, hey, look it up. What more can I say? Wikipedia is a great place to start. They won't give you all the knowledge you need to know to solve life's problems, but it's certainly a place to start. Just to clarify for your benefit, how robust is the terminology already in existence about this particular aspect of free energy? If whether or not it's the only aspect where free energy comes from, I don't know. I don't know if it's exclusive to free energy, but this particular area, it's so robust in synonymous terms. I just want to clear you in, or zone you in, focus you on, this is not new knowledge, it's just something we don't normally think about. Okay, so another way to say 180 degrees out of phase, or standing wave between current and voltage, or negative unity power factor, another way to say it is capacitive reactance dominates about 100% over inductive reactance. Because the opposite, when current and voltage are in phase with 0 degrees difference between them, not only are they positive unity power factor, but they are also a condition in which inductive reactance dominates and capacitive reactance is just about non-existent. So the laws of thermodynamics only applies to inductive reactance. The laws of thermodynamics do not apply to capacitive reactance. Hey, I just follow the logic here, you know. I don't have to be a rocket scientist just to follow the logic and infer a few new things from the little insight right there. And I got that from another electrical engineer, Lauren Rademacher, who I forget his qualification, but he's an electrical engineer of a certain type or a certain country. In any case, he dealt with this question that somebody posed to him on Quora, I believe it was, and so it gave me more facts, more terminology, and so I like to share that with you. So it's a very robust subject. It's just not something that normally people deal with. And I'm here to tell you, you can do something with it. I have, at least idealistically, in a simulator environment, which all it means is it's overly simplified. So if I went to build what I had simulated, there will be more technical details in the build than what I had to deal with. It'll be more complicated. So then it starts becoming to look like a rocket science kind of situation in which you have all kinds of details to deal with. But idealistically, in the thematic sense, it's very simple. It could be taught to a college student easily, or an advanced high school student stage. It's not hard to understand. Building it might be a little more complicated, but understanding it is not that complicated. To the ones who are gifted or want to go in that area, who are curious to know more about electricity. because those are terms that you don't normally hear in basic electrical engineering classes or electrical classes in general. Capacitive reactance, what's the difference? Inductive reactance, it's something new to me. As it is, I'm using terms I don't fully understand, but I can appreciate vaguely the distinction between them based on their synonymous with other terms I already vaguely understand. So, and I can understand the laws of thermodynamics, you know. You're cold, you put a sweater on, right? How hard is it to understand the laws of thermodynamics? Well, that's inductive reactance dominating the situation. I'm cold because it's cold outside and my body's warm and I have to put on a sweater. It is not hard to come up with examples, you know, for some of this stuff.